Okay, so in assignment, we are moving now to assignment 2, and in assignment 2, we are asked to provide, to illustrate how we would create reading activities, 5 of them, which would support children in learning to read. So the focus is really on developing activities that support children in reading. Typically, that would probably be something like 5 lessons. Now, what we will be doing here is not to do lesson designs or lesson descriptions, but I will actually want you to show in quite a detail in your assignment what materials you will be using, how will you be using, what kinds of activities will these materials help you to create, and has all of this talking to the curriculum, right? So the first 2, 3, 4 slides will be your theoretical explanation. I think I mentioned that in other lectures. Your theoretical explanation of the pedagogy that you will be using, and I'm very happy for you all to take notes from these lectures and basically um, use them as a structure for framing your pedagogy. So the first few slides will be about your description why you are designing those 5 activities in this particular way. And then what I would like you to do is design those 5 reading activities that within a lesson structure should support children in the task of reading. So today what we did on the in the on-campus class, rather than just move swiftly into how to do it, we started breaking down the steps of designing activities. Just for a very brief moment, we have left the curriculum on the side, and the first question we asked ourselves was, well, what is wrong with the traditional situation when the teacher just walks in with a text and reads a text to children? And then I asked our students, okay, so what happens next? There's obviously less engagement. Well, the teachers actually can create engagement because they can actually um, say to children, this is a lovely book and all of this, or remember how we went to the zoo and this is a book about the animals in the zoo or something like that. That's okay. But what happens next, the teacher is reading to children something that the teacher wants children to actually listen to. And then typically what happens next, that the teacher involves children in some form of exchange. Largely, all these exchanges go between the teacher and the student. Even though they might be going between students, they all focus on the kinds of questions or that the teacher wants to hear. So basically, we've got this toing and froing between the teacher and students, and sometimes it might actually flow really well, especially if you get in classroom 5 children that are particularly engaged. Um, so there, but we are not we are here in this ELA 200, not necessarily in order to actually learn how to make the lessons flow and how to make the most use out of 5 children. What we really want is all children to be given equal chances to progress. And this is quite difficult. Now, obviously, you have noticed now that I would like to say in assignment 2, activities that obviously are social activities that connect with the community, justly, which means if you want to create an event with older people, it may not necessarily be with your students fronting up in front of the age care center and just it. As you might recall from previous lectures, what I would like us to think is activities which actually enable children to actually explore who is in the community, explore how their understanding of the community can enrich the event they create for an aged care center. And this afternoon in the on-campus class, we got these kinds of thoughts made us realize that maybe by the time we work with the community and invite them to help children in classroom with different activities, and these people of course will activate their networks. In the end, an event in an aged care center might be so big that we will have to hire a room and a bus, and that will be an outing for all the people. Wouldn't be amazing? So certainly, I want all these social things to happen, and all the things that Ockerman is talking about in her paper, which is children talking to each other and discussing the understanding. But people cannot be just left to discussion between each other. They need direction. They need materials against which they can compare whether they are on the right track, whether there is something else to learn, all this. So you will notice that I will be doing in the next coming weeks, what I will be teaching you is not on, or at least trying to somehow engage with you in a discussion, that it is not but activities that we will be creating of social nature, engagement of the community, but the support that we will be creating will need to have some materials on which your children can draw in order to learn about the world, and also some technology resources or technology tools that will enable children to do two things: explore these materials that you will create, play with them in different ways, as well as uh, introduce some more creative play into the classroom. Now, some of you might be more exposed to technology in the context of literacy in primary schools, but some of you might be less exposed. Now, there is a reason why actually people at all levels, be it university or schools, are actually pushing for further professional development in ICT among the teachers, because people in decision making, the policy people, understand perfectly well that there is a very, very good need for technology in classrooms. They also understand that on a daily basis, there's that technology and ICT tools are quite underutilized. So sometimes teachers might use iPads, sometimes people might use a camera. Well, that's all well, but there's, if you might not know, but there is an entire field in education called technology enhanced learning. People make professorships out of this. People write PhDs on technology enhanced learning. So you can now imagine that the field exists because there must be a reason. And this is why we will be looking at integrating technology to support children to develop increasingly better informed understandings of literacy and its value to their lives, while also not losing sight of the social component of learning. So there. So when we look at this situation here, when we have a teacher, and we've discussed it last week, what happens, we don't really know what kinds of relationships these children are creating, kinds of understandings these children are creating in their heads, and we don't even know whether they actually can utilize it in any way that is empowering to them. So what we explored today in class was the situation where we actually ask ourselves, when we design a unit, what is the objective that is driving it? So we know there is a curriculum and so on, but what is the objective? Is it for students to respond to our question in a manner that we approve of? There is no right and wrong answer in itself, but when we look into the curriculum and when we look into the capabilities, which are social, creative, critical thinking, all these, we notice that the questions and answers themselves are not defendable as a pedagogy for addressing those capabilities. Children somehow need to be engaged in a creative way. They need to creative means they need to create. And in this situation, they are not creating. And you might think for yourselves, well, maybe they will be creating later on. Well, we learn as we create. We don't learn, we don't create after we have learned, because it's the act of creation that generates questions in us. Right? The act of creation makes us think, oh my God, we need to have a look at some more things. It's the act of creation that makes children talk to each other and say, oh no, maybe we need something else. I agree with you, I disagree. Or maybe I have seen something this way and then you have seen another way. And Miss, what do you think? And all that, right? It's the act of creation that makes room for the community representatives to come to classroom and explain how to create invitations for members of their particular linguistic community or cultural community. Right? It's the act of creation. It's the act of creation that gives a need for critical evaluation. And critical evaluation is not just of an argument, but also of the picture of the community that we create as we go about our task. Are we only limiting ourselves to Anglo-Saxon text, to the community that is white and speaks English? What kind of world are we introducing into our students as we engage them in those projects? Right? So that's what we were doing last week and over the last so many weeks, by trying to actually look for theoretical justification for questions which enable us to look at the world, at our own practice in a more comprehensive way. And we will work with it step by step of how it relates to creating learning activities or reading activities. But for now, and this is a very short class because it ended up to be quite a concise short class, if the objective for students to respond to our questions is not sufficient, then maybe we need another objective. And that's the one for students to develop a personal relationship with literacy, a personal relationship. And we know that as they explore, as they play with things, as they discuss with one another, look at things, talk to members of the community, again, test their powers by playing some more, they learn. So what I wanted to do today is to have a very short class, but I wanted to be very precise about what I mean by play. Typically, I myself define play as testing one's own abilities, potential. But for today's class, and maybe for these coming up weeks, we might look at literacy as identifying the relevance of literacy to our lives, or students identify the relevance of literacy to their lives through play. Not through answering questions alone, which leads to what? These questions, the point of these questions, of course, the objective of these questions is in the teacher's head, but not in students' head. But if children learn through play, and we know it, everyone says that play is the way to go, then we need to facilitate play. Because play is empowering, but it only can be empowering if children have tools for playing, if you can see my point. Without tools, there is no play. And if the only tools we give them is one page on the book or one book, right? If the only tools we give them is glue, then I would have to say that in terms of the policies, you will understand that policies and the curriculum as a result say that we need to actually introduce other tools, including technology, because there is a reason for it. And the reason is that it enables children to bring the world into the classroom the way you couldn't do it in the 19th century or in the 16th century. And you will know that this pedagogy You could do in 16th century. Of course, the books were more expensive, and that's why there was one book only, and that's where this tradition comes from. If the book was at the did cost something like a house, they couldn't bring to the classroom 3,000 books. Right? So this pedagogy could have been easily done in the 16th century, and it was also done in the 19th century because the purpose of education was different. And also, not just purpose of education was different, the field of education was not so developed. Today, we have sociologists, philosophers, semioticians, linguists looking at the concept of education and, and developing it to the degree that we know that this model of education, we know that this model of education is for the I don't want to call it wrong, but insufficient to meet the demands of modern environments, of the modern world. It is insufficient, and you could not defend it, this toing and froing, in relation to the curriculum. So if we were to look now at the concept of play, so what we want children is actually through play, and play is creating, right? When children play, they build things, right? We all know it. So now we need to somehow make the bridge, make the connection between what we say in one environment, which is, oh yeah, play is great, and in another environment, which is a formal structure of the classroom, right? Everybody, wherever you go, says play is great. Through play, which is through the act of creating, questions arise, and these questions then get solved by children, not just by talking to one another, because children are limited in their knowledge. Teacher is limited in his or her comprehensions of children's questions. So what has to happen is now tools and environment has to be created so that children have more than each other and more than the teacher to experience questions and to answer these questions to themselves. And therefore, because they answer their own questions in a sense, they create, and because they do it in the act of creation or through play by creating things, they develop a personal relationship with literacy. They do things for mom, like a mother card. They do things for older people, right? They do things in order to have an impact. So what we were looking at, just to have this class reduced to as little minutes as possible for today, what we were looking at, if we were to create, so then of course, as I mentioned, play, and some of you have looked at the module and you know that I like ideas like creating, working with games, working with more empowering and more abstract tools like these ones. But rather than jump into them too quickly because they're not sufficient, they were just examples. What I would like you to do is actually ask yourself, okay, if we want students to play and therefore through play generate questions and answer them and generate more questions and more energy, what are the kinds of objectives that feed that concept of play? And in class today we identified a few, which was create their own experience of literacy, their own experience of literacy, right? Not the teacher, when the teacher's toing and froing and saying these words matter and so on. Actually, we mentioned another one that I didn't insert here, and I might just put in, and that was an amazement that words have a sound and vice versa, right? An amazement, not the teacher pointing to things. Letters on the text don't talk, but that's why children like games, because you click and it talks. And rather than walking away from it and saying, well, it is not a dead letter on the text. No, it isn't. That's why you have 2-year-olds sitting on iPads for hours That's why you have us sitting on computers all the time, on Facebook, depending on our literacy range, we do different things and to a different extent. But that's why we use it, because we click and the world is in our table, at our fingertips. So what I'm saying here, these are the particular objectives. Children create their own experience, evaluate choices and their guesses, their own choices. Through play, they explore and evaluate and follow hunches. They actually identify they explore that they develop an awareness that texts have a structure, right? It's one thing for you to say, look at this text. It has a beginning, middle, and end, and that's not very meaningful, because um, these are just sort of very common ways of talking about text structure. But if we actually allow children to play, and we enable through different activities for children as they play to develop these awarenesses of the text have structure, and we will need activities for it, that's amazing. Then we also can, so a play also can actually has an empowering element. Children can actually, even pre-literacy children can actually find out they can create text and they can read, because the computer helps them. The computer helps them, just like us. We are now all perfect spellers, provided we actually uh, correct our typos and everything, and listen to the spell checker, right? Nowadays, nobody makes spelling mistakes provided they use the spell checker. Well, if we have this facility, why not use facility that technologies enable? Why not use it in classroom? So these are the sort of objectives that you could actually integrate already in a creative way and start building your supporting reading activities around them. So last week we have identified, or well, not just last week, but we talked about the engagement phase. But once children want to actually, they engage and they look at the community, they see what's out there, and then you might actually interest them in playing with literacy. And this is the bridge we will cross next week. But I don't want to overwhelm you. And today I just wanted to actually draw this distinction between the objective, which is to follow the teacher's cues all the time and have this toing and throwing. And it's all about responding to teacher's cues. And the other one is about doing anything possible, but we can actually imagine and to enable children through creative play to develop their own personal relationship with literacy. So here are our objectives. And I've discussed in different modules, but we will do it in more detail next week. I've discussed in different models how through games you can do it, or how you can do it through speech to text, how you can do it through avatar, how you can do it through different devices, because games are great. And when they are put together in a meaningful way that actually facilitates exploration, that's great. But then these ones are a bit more creative. They look weird. There's nothing in them. But imagine children saying words to this particular device and things popping out. So children all of a sudden can develop a relationship that with with words. So as I say things, text happens. Oh, really? As I say, text happens to us when we're 50 or 30. That's obvious, but not to children. As I say, things get written. Oh my God, that's an oh my God experience for children. And then the computer, if you use a free model of this program, the computer doesn't get it right, especially if you have an accent like I have. But the computer doesn't get it right, so that's very good. You know how we learn on mistakes? Then children develop a relation, that something happens, and say that the computer comes, so children say something, but the speech to text comes out with a text that is actually not reflecting what the children said. So the children can actually play it and they will hear that the text is saying something else. And then you can teach them, how many words did you say? How many words do you see? Do you see what I'm saying? And they develop a relationship between quantifying, segmenting words. The words actually come with in a shape of connected bits. And you know, the word you know has 2 connected bits. I am Ania has 3 connected bits. And you can actually, and in this way, children will start learning, not just mathematics actually, but they will start learning that the computer must be, that there must be a matching situation between what was said and what the computer comes up with. And here it is to children listen to their own sounds, to their own speech, and then they to so what happens actually, not to their own speech, what they do actually hear, pardon me, what they do, they type things and then they hear avatar pronouncing what they type, and that's also play an amazing thing as well. Because as I often say, how many times in their lives they will find someone who will patiently pronounce everything they type? Never. Not on an individual basis, not or group basis, right? A teacher can only do it this many times, and after a while, you go nuts. That's why these activities are so popular, because you control it, you do it only a few times, whatever the repetitions are required, and you move on, and then you give homework. There is a movement now in Australia away from homeworks, right? So when I'm saying there's a movement away from homeworks, because basically what people say, there must be ways to use children's time more efficiently in classroom. So this, and then there were other games I showed you and so on, and the technology like the Google Maps and all of this. Anyway, this is not the lesson necessarily about how to go about these objectives of play, but it is to sensitize you that in order to actually generate play, it would be good if you now could think of activities whereby you could enable these particular objectives to actually happen, right? So you could actually start thinking about what devices, what kind of activities, what would you do for this to happen? The children create their own experiences, they evaluate their own choices, they do all these amazing things without you necessarily saying that's how the text looks like. That's what's the structure of the text. Because when you actually take over, you do not allow them to create their own experiences and learn by evaluating choices and develop their own awarenesses. And actually what you don't do is, when you actually take over, you do not enable children to create their own sense of their own understanding of literacy being relevant in their lives. You actually tell them it is relevant, and that's 2 different things. Now, you know, regarding this one, this is very easy. In some of my lectures, you will find when I say to people, you can actually take a commercially produced book, which is dead, and make children look at it. That's 16th century. But what you can also do is put things on the smartboard. Nothing stops you from typing text, and then children click on words and click on letters and things get pronounced for them, and that's amazing. The text comes alive. That's why people love it if it is used. If it is not used, then if we have not experienced this from other teachers teaching us how to do it, then we think that the commercially published book is all we can have. But in fact, it's not. And we can actually bring more life into texts. So there, I will finish it for today and this brief lecture, and hopefully that started you going about the concept of play and about the objectives of it, and now maybe about creating a context in your lessons where children can experience literacy as opposed to be taught literacy. Thank you very much.